I've always been curious as to how you take a chunk of a tree and turn it into something beautiful. So today, I'm going to make a cutting board out of hardwood logs I collected after Hurricane Matthew. Prior to this, I started breaking down one of the logs with my bandsaw, so I'll remove the bark from the second log and do the same to it. I cut a small piece of plywood to attach to one side of the log. When I cut the log using the bandsaw, I place the plywood against the fence. This allows me to cut a relatively straight line on the parallel side of the log. I remove the plywood, turn the cut side face down, and reattach the plywood 90 degrees to the flat side. Now that I have two flat sides that are 90 degrees to each other, I no longer need the plywood as a straight line reference. These pieces are still too big to cut with my table saw, so I'll continue to use the bandsaw to break them down. Once I finished breaking the logs down with the bandsaw, I started building a table saw jig I will use to more accurately straighten the boards. The jig consists of 5 pieces: a sheet of plywood with a miter bar attached to the bottom, 2 thin strips of MDF, and 2 clamps. I attach the 2 strips of MDF together and screw the clamps into the top of it. Then, I attach that piece to the main sheet of plywood. Because this jig is guided by the miter track, it will cut a nearly perfect straight line. I use it to cut 2 of the 4 sides on each piece of wood. When I finished using the jig, I set my table saw fence to the thickness I wanted the cutting board and ripped all of the pieces again. I also ripped down some strips of Purple Heart to inlay in the cutting board. I messed around with the layout for a bit, made a decision of how I wanted it, and then glued it up. I don't have parallel clamps yet, so I used a couple straight pieces of tile to keep them in line as best I could. With the glue up finished, it's time to flatten the cutting board. And since I don't have a planer or a jointer, I'm going to achieve this by making what's called a router planing jig. The base of the jig is a piece of MDF with 2 accurately cut parallel walls that act as straight rails. I wedge the cutting board into the base and then grab the top half of the jig. The top half is 3 pieces of MDF screwed together with a slot cut straight down the middle. It's essentially a track for your router. Using a straight bit, I set the height of the router and then make passes across the top and bottom of the cutting board until both sides are flat. I used the crosscut sled to clean up both ends of the cutting board, and then proceeded to router all edges. And then that one last pesky thing before we get to put on the top coat, sanding. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoyed the content, please don't forget to like, sub, and hit the notification bell. If you'd like to see me build something more specific, feel free to leave it in the comments. Thanks again.